Spentamainyush Gatha, Yasna 48. Yaziadais asharujem venhiti yadasashuta yadebetana frakta emeritaeti daevaischa masyaischa atoisava is savais vahmem vakshat ahura. When shall the overcoming of the wicked by retributions through righteousness, when he arrives at what long since was announced through fire beings and the doomed in immortality, then, O Lord, will with prophets prosper. Praise to thee. Well, certainly if the fire beings have choice, they don't have to all be demons now, do they? So, it's referring to a very specific one. And perhaps among the 20 Nashks, or Nashk, what's the term? That this is only a fragment of one of them, and even stuff that was lost to a further antiquity. A lot of things could have been qualified, rather than referring to priestly interpretations. Verse 2. Va'ochamo yadvem vidvae ahura parahyat mayameng perthajameti kadashava mazdavenghat Dragvantem hazi and heus vanahi vista keretis. Speak to me, O Lord, for thou art an expert knower. Will the righteous overcome the wicked? Before the beginning of the compensations thou hast brought out. That would be a good message to the world. Oh, I'm not saying that we don't strive for the outwards victory, but in a spiritual and even psychological sense, sometimes that's different, and that's what you can really rely on. Verse 3. Advaedem naevahishta sananam Yam Hudaye Sasti Yashahuro Spentu Vidvaye Yachit Guzra Senghaenhu Thwavas Mazdavanhes Krathwamananhu. But for an expert knower is the best of teachings, which the beneficent Lord is teaching with justice. The expert knower who is one like thee, O Mazda, through the understanding of good disposition. Mazda meaning mindful. Who knows bounteous secrets which are expressed in the doctrines. Verse 4. Yedat mano vahyo mazdash yascha avodanam shathanacha vachanhacha ahyazasheng ushtesvereneng hachete thwami Krataya pemem nana anhat. Whatever, O mindful, exercises his mind, through the better, through the worse, whoever exercises his spirit, which with such uncertain deed and word, whoever follows the delights wishes and convictions of such uncertainty, shall he in thy estimation at last be separated from those who have done thy will. Verse 5. Hukshatrakshantamane dusekshatraksanta vanhuyai chistois shathanais armati yazai mashyai ap zathembahishta gavoe verizyatam tamnevarethae vshuyo. May not bad rulers rule over us. May good rulers rule with deeds, good doctrinal thoughts. O love, best one, for mortal men thus perfect and additional, our latter, our especial birth, but for cattle that pasturage which should fatten it for our food. Verse 6. Hazinehusho with them haneuteo utayuetim dot tevishim vanheus mananhu berekde at ahyae ashamazdae urvarae vakshat ahuro vanheus zathoe pauyehya. O love, prized by good disposition for men, she produced good dwelling, enduringness and vitality, but for that the mindful Lord with justice caused plants to grow at the birth of the first life. Verse 7. Niya shemoni dyatam peti remem peti syozdum noet avenheus mananhu dirangzoduye ashavyam yehya hithaus naspantu at hoe damam thwahmi adamahura. Let fury of rapine be put down. Oppose cruelty, ye who wish to assure yourselves of the reward of a good disposition through justice, to whose bond would wish to belong to the bounteous man. Who shall abode in thy dwelling, O Lord? Verse 8. Kato evanheus mazdakshatraya ishtes katoe ashoes thwahyae mebiohura kathwoe ashakae aredreng ishya venheus manieus shathananam javaro. O mindful Lord, is the wealth of thy good realm, is of thy compensation for me. Will you please the faithful when it shall have been made manifest through justice? And in citation are weighing off of the deeds of the good mentality. Verse 9. Kadavada yazi chahya kshayatha mazda shayahyane aethis dvaetha eresmo eresucham venheus thafas mananho vidyat Sashyas Yatha Hoe Ashis Anhat. When may I know, O mindful Lord, whether thou rulest through justice over every one from whom destruction threatens me? It is no more than right that thou shouldest tell me in just words the decrees of good disposition, for the Saviour would like to know how his compensation shall be given to me. And let me remind you that it's not talking about the Christian sense of Savior. It's more of the Avatar, Sent One, Rasul, Nabi, various other terms. Mature? Is that the word? Is that the word for priest? I forget. But that sense of Savior is an individual that they know the teachings of real theophany, real hierophany, and by hierophany specifically referring to the light beings and what messages they have said, and delivers, being thus called to be a prophet of the real God, then they go forth. But not, they do their deeds for you. We're not advocating a church here. This building and this room that I'm renting and another building which I intend to set up are not as such. Verse 10. Kadamazdamanaroits narovisente kadajenbutremahya mangahya yangraya karapanno urupayenti yachakratuduse kshathradayunam. When, O mindful Lord, will men gain knowledge of the message, when they expel the dregs of this intoxication, whereby is practiced deceit in the hostile Karapans and the bad land rulers in the position to understand? So, ritual drug use is being condemned. Regular drug use, recreational drug use is condemned. I'm not going to condemn it in terms of what is needed for survival. What's wanted, that's different. But what is needed for survival, well, I'm not going to condemn that either. But some will say it's cheating because every drug-related high resides in our body without abuse. People may understand the, I wasn't hurting myself the other night. But without abuse, without needless danger, without every drug high, related high, resides in our body. But it can take a while in the discipline, so that in a way it's cheating to take drugs. So verse 11. Kadamazda shamadarma etes jimakshatra Vastraviti koeregvodebis krurais ramam daente kenya venheus jimatmanan huchiestis. When, O mindful, will love with justice and power and good dwelling come in a pastoral realm, who will give us peace through bloodiness of the wicked, unto whom will the doctrinal thought of good disposition enter? Now, sometimes it becomes apparent, but let's not take this out of context and realize that there was a violent persecution, and there were people that were being, and other than what was happening to them, there were other people to protect as such, and sometimes that's the only meaning left, so let's not be cowardly in that respect. It's not for country. It's not for, well, I believe something different. No, it's to protect the innocents. And I guess, places of worship too. But that's not mentioned here, I don't remember. But verse 12, Atoe anhen sasyantu dahyunam yoekšnum vahu mananhaya hachante shyathanais ashathwahya mazdasenghaya Poesi data hamastaru Hashem mahya. But these are the saviors of lands, O mindful, who with good disposition and justice strive to satisfy thy teachings or doctrines through deeds. They become conquerors of fury of rapine, the devil. And so the Ha'oma. And the Ha'oma, before we close with that and leave Yasna 49 for another time, is something very like the Soma of the Hindus, the four other tribes of those 5 tribes of Aryavatra, the Aryans. You also had mashed up marijuana, opium, ephedra juice. But I found a formula, an ancient formula that has, and there's been archaeological finds that confirm this, 37 other plants. Some of this enhances the high. Some of these are purely medicinal or health-related or something like that without intoxication. But it's certainly a stronger blend than what was left in India for the Soma. And there began to be replacements for some of these too. Fly agaric and some other things were used that were completely independent of the Haoma. And it's just like the Soma, it is thought that it's a broader term. But let's share, the rest of a file here, perhaps. Higher criticism of the Gathas. Chapter 1. Oh, how many chapters? Why Gathic criticism is inevitable. Part 1. Higher criticism, universal, even if unconscious. The clearer understanding of any book presupposes a grasp of the principles of interpretation. A novelist is not expected to be as accurate as a geographer, nor a poet as a sociologist or a theologian. With most books, this preliminary attitude of the reader is so obvious that the question of interpretation is never raised or even noticed, or even mooted. Nevertheless, it exists, for many books have, from time to time, been misunderstood, and hence have caused misunderstandings, exploded literary jokes, still deceiving the unwary generation after generation. And certainly mythologies about certain faiths and conservative traditions have really confused the whole lot of us about some stuff. The question of interpretation has been raised principally in the connection with the most important books, such as the Bible, Homer, or the Hindu epics. Now there is a more read book and more recited prayer in the West than the Bible and this one of the 2 versions of the Lord's Prayer. Well, I guess they put them both together and admitting that they're a little bit different. Of Hindu epics, the Puranas. It might well, therefore, be applied to the Gathas. Well, no, I'm not saying it's the Puranas. Might as well, therefore, be applied to the Gathas, which form the nucleus of a historical religion which has survived several millenniums. But the study of the Gathas is nowadays less of a problem of orthodoxy than one of comparative religion by such as do not profess their dogmatic authority. On this latter account, indeed, application of the canons of interpretation to them might seem a need less burning, were it not, for they present some very real, special difficulties, which are set forth at length in this chapter, and which compel the application of the methods of the higher criticism. And can you use higher criticisms of your higher criticism. It is granted that it is most unfortunate that we have to judge of our facts before making deductions from them. It would seem to destroy all hope of attaining results that are objective, but this misfortune is common to most inquiries, even so certain a study as the differential calculus rests on a illogical basis, namely that one would ever reach a limit by approaching it by infinitesimal quantities. We must therefore resign ourselves to unavoidable human limitations and make the best of them. Part 2. Special Gathic difficulties demanding interpretation. The special Gathic difficulties which demand interpretation or higher criticism may be distinguished as difficulties of 1. The works themselves, their language, the author, the condition, internal, their date, and traditional orthodox interpretations, Mazdian, their bearing on the development of Christian, for modern conditions of thought, modern. 1. Internal causes of the extraordinary difficulties of interpreting the Gathas. 1. Great wealth of forms for a single case of the same class. Just mentions 10 forms for the accusative plural of nouns of the first class. Conversely, many particular forms are found repeated in different cases. For instance, could have been found as termination in some one of the declensions of every case except dative or ablative singular. This source of uncertainty is of vital dogmatic importance in the case of the termination which occurs in the vocative and instrumental singular, and nominative and accusative plural of the first declension. So that it is always uncertain whether Asha is addressed as an independent being or only as an instrument of the Supreme. Well, a lot of these things are meant to be used by people of, that are open to being used by people of different beliefs and different interpretations. The uncertainty of many tenses as to whether they should be interpreted as the definitive conjunctive mood or in the indefinitive injunctive mood, which may mean either past, present, or future. Justin mentions a number of cases where scholars have claimed that case forms are interchanged. In the latter periods, grammatical degeneration set in, resulting in chaos. This may account for some of the hopeless passages. Syntax, at best, is scanty, allowing of different interpretations. As in other languages, so here words have several meanings, so that the same words are interpreted, life for people, and religion or individuality. This opens the way for great uncertainties and differences of opinion, some of which may never be settled authoritatively. Well, certainly there's questions with the languages of every faith before Quran. So, every, the text of every faith before Quran. The Latin versions of the Bible, the Greek versions. There's questions linguistically with some of that, and many other examples. The great number of apparently synonymous words whose distinctive shades of meaning seem to be hopelessly lost for reasons both internal and external. Internally, many of them occur only once, so that we are deprived of internal comparative assistance, while the lack of contemporary writings deprives us of external guides to interpretation. The difficulties of Western writing are great in themselves, for the letters are both numerous and difficult to form, and distinguish both in enunciation and representation. The natural vicissitudes incident to the repeated copying of the manuscripts must have led to many errors and changes, which would explain many of the variant readings given by Geldner. The political vicissitudes of the Persian race and the Mazdian religion were so extreme as to lead the hopeless destruction of all but the fragments we possess, which themselves must have been affected by the persecutions. The evident literary manipulation of the Gathas, whose order is not logical or topical but mechanical, apparently according to the numbers of the lines of the stanzas, which are 3 in Yasna 28 through 34, 5 lines in Yasna 43 through 46, 4 lines in Yasna 47 through 50, 3 lines in Yasna 51, and 5 lines again in Yasna 53. There are places and words generally given up as hopelessly insoluble or corrupt. Among such passages are perhaps 46:17, 52, 51:12, 17:18. One most important line is 46:15 is omitted. Difficulties are Javar in 48:8, Dahya in 48:10, and Beedus in 53:4, and Yahame in 53:8. And there's additions and subtractions continuing to this day in the Bible. Over 10,000 variant examples, individual things, in the Greek New Testament, and through all the dialects, all 10 dialects of the Quran, you don't have a single change. You don't have a single contradiction. So that's not a problem there, but there's problems like that with a lot of texts, and this is just one example. The Mazda Yasna has Zarathustrish. The clearly expressed desire of certain scholars to keep the text of the Gathas as much as possible from the public. One scholar has begun the text in Roman transcription, stopped off short, and purposely continued it in the difficult Avestan characters. Are they trying to monopolize the subject? Well, actually, that makes it easier to read, doesn't it? That the personal animosities of the chief scholars have led them to ignore each other. It has hindered the progress of the comparative commentary method so fatal an extent that one goes out of his way to announce that his interpretation of 29:6, 37:8, 10, 34:4, and 44:7 is so certain as to be unquestioned, whereas the other has a different rendering. The mutual uncharitableness of the scholars, which does not stop short of quoting other interpretations while suppressing the names of their authors, to whom, however, worthy motives are ascribed, the frank disregard of case forms by the most prominent translators, even after they have formally announced that they will not even consider the interpretation of any man who does so. Perhaps the chief internal difficulty is the interpretation of the divine names, or the spiritual names, perhaps not all divine. Should they be considered as personal divinities or as the psychological faculties of the believer? Well, certainly, love, most loving, well, doesn't mean that humans can't have a loving aspect of themselves. Or do you actually believe that? Bartholomew's statement of the problem, GD, of the 2, is useful. According as Emeritat indicates the divinity or the abstract idea, the word has been rendered emeritat, or immortality. It is, however, quite impossible to decide with certainty everywhere, for the poet himself did not hold to a firm delimitation between the abstracted idea and the divinity. Only on this assumption can we understand that the divinity usually named Bahumana, the good mind, is also occasionally referred to as Vahishta Mana, or the best mind, or even thy, Mazda's mind. Consequently, it is necessary, when such divinities are named, ever to keep in our consciousness what the name really signifies, and conversely, when these abstract ideas are named, that they present themselves to the bard also as divinities. Only thus do we approach his meaning, but who will or can decide when the bard intended divinity, and where is the concept? And it's important to consider the idea that not being poetry, there was very seriously that there can be poets doing good things, but there's a difference between a poet and a prophet, and linguistically there is too. Part 2. Mazdean are external difficulties of interpreting the Gathas. Now, if you look at the older dates for when it said Zarathustra was, you can say that perhaps it was put into Avestan of a certain period. So just like the English version of the Book of Revelation sounds a lot better than it does, or it's more poetic and stuff, however you're going to refer to that, perhaps it's just a loss in translation. So Mazdian are external difficulties of interpreting the Gathas. The mere fact that the Gathas are embedded in the scriptures of the Mazdians is proof that their orthodox religions developed in their latter commentaries have established a theological canon of interpretation, even if the Pahlavi translation, Naryosanga's Sanskrit text, and later manuscripts for the first time assembled by Mills were not to be considered. But of course these latter Mazdian ecclesiastical interpretations are of no soteriological interest to us. On the contrary, they are so serious hindrances to us who wish to arrive at the significance of the Gathas in themselves before Zarathustra's personal prayers and praises were erected into doctrines and ritual. Well, they would have started as ritual, but not quite the level of ritual that we're familiar with in looking at these things. The hindrance are the strictness to the point of not being able to live life. The hindrance to correct interpretation of the Gathas by these Mazdian ecclesiastical commentaries cannot be fully or sufficiently realized until we recall the Reformation, when a century-long war and persecution were necessary to divorce well-meaning humanity from similar ecclesiastical interpretations. Moreover, every assured result of modern criticism has been achieved by a fresh restatement of ancient problems and studious avoidance of ecclesiastical interpretation. The same general rules must obtain in the Gothic field. Hence we must consider Pahlavi and ecclesiastical interpretations as obstacles rather than guides. 3. Christian difficulties in interpreting the Gathas. I guess I'm gonna have to stop there, but Kshnatra Urahemazda Ashembaha Kam Namazda Ashembaha.